Marcus turned to run, but his legs felt heavy, as if he were wading through wet cement. The air in room 404 had dropped 30 degrees in the span of a single minute. His breath hung before his face in a pale, trembling cloud. The green and cream terrazzo tile in the center aisle was cracking. He watched, paralyzed, as long, jagged fissures branched out from the base of the demonstration table, crawling up the tiered steps like dark ivy. From those cracks, something began to ooze. It wasn't blood, it was a thick, black oil that smelled of wood rot and wet slate. And then the lockers in the hallway outside began to slam. Bang! Bang! Bang bang bang. It sounded like a dozen people running down the corridor, hitting every metal door with their fists as they passed. But there was no rhythm to it, it was frantic, a chaotic tattooing of iron that grew louder, closer, moving from the far end of the fourth floor straight toward room 404. Marcus scrambled backward, his boots slipping on the slick stone steps. He fell onto the second tier, his hands landing in the thick dust. The door to the room swung wide. The hallway outside was no longer dark. It was filled with a thick, gray luminescence, like the belly of a winter storm cloud. Standing in the doorway was not a person, but a shape, a tall, impossibly thin figure silhouette against the gray light. It wore a long, dark coat that seemed to dissolve at the edges into the surrounding shadow, and its head was tilted at an unnatural, 90-degree angle toward its shoulder. It was Mr. Vance. Or it had been. The face was wrong. The eyes were gone, replaced by two perfectly circular, black smudges that looked exactly like the marker strokes in the ruined yearbook. His mouth was open, stretched so wide the corners of his lips had split, leaking that same dark, viscous oil down his white collar. In his hand, Vance held the heavy iron key ring. He raised it, his arm moving with the stiff, jerky motion of a puppet on a string. "Marcus," Vance said. The voice didn't come from his mouth, it came from the walls, from the iron pipes, from the floor beneath Marcus's palms. It was the sound of 1,000 dry pages turning at once. "You haven't checked the lockers on 4. The census is incomplete." "Let me go," Marcus whispered. He couldn't breathe. His lungs felt like they were filling with chalk dust. "The doors are locked. Let me out." "No one leaves until the rooms are clear," the Vance thing said. It stepped into the room. As its shoe hit the stone floor, the black oil surged up around its ankle, binding it to the building. The school year must balance. 14 came in. 14 must stay. Marcus looked down at the mimeographed paper he was still clutching in his left hand. The names were shifting. The faded purple ink was running, the letters reforming themselves into new shapes. The first name on the list was no longer a boy from 1975. It was Marcus Kahn. The status next to his name didn't say retained. It was changing, the letters sharpening into a deep, greasy black that bit into the paper. "Collected." "No," Marcus screamed. He threw the yearbook at the figure. The heavy leatherette book struck Vance in the chest, but it didn't bounce off, it simply sank into the dark coat like stones into mud, disappearing with a soft, wet slurp. The Vance thing reached into its pocket and pulled out a heavy black felt tip marker. The chute. Marcus didn't think. He threw himself sideways, rolling over the stone benches as the figure lunged forward with a horrific, silent speed. The thing's hand brushed the back of his denim jacket, and where its fingers touched, the fabric instantly rotted away, leaving 5 cold, gray streaks on his skin that burned like dry ice. He hit the floor at the base of the tiers and scrambled for the back door, the old prep room exit that led to the service stairwell. He burst through the door into a space that was entirely black. There were no lights here, only the narrow concrete steps that dropped straight down into the core of the building. He didn't use the handrail, he threw himself down the stairs, 3 at a time, his boots barely touching the concrete before he was falling again. Behind him, he could hear the sound of the key ring. Clink. 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 It was coming down the stairs behind him, not running, but dropping from landing to landing with a heavy, metallic regularity that was faster than any human could sprint. He reached the third-floor landing and hit the fire doors, bursting out into the main hallway. The building had changed. The green and cream walls were sweating. Great, glistening streaks of water ran down the plaster, washing away the green paint to reveal the rough, red brick underneath. The ceiling tiles had swollen and dropped, hanging down like long, white tongues. And from every locker, a sound was coming. It was the sound of fingernails. Thousands of them, scratching against the inside of the steel doors. Scritch. 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 "Let us out," a voice screamed from locker 312, a high, breaking girl's voice that Marcus recognized from his homeroom. "Marcus! Open the latch. It's hot in here." "Don't look," he sobbed to himself, his chest heaving as he sprinted down the long corridor toward the incinerator chute. "Don't look, don't look, don't look." He reached the iron door of the chute. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely lift the latch. When he finally yanked it open, the heat that blasted out was monstrous, a roaring, orange gale that smelled of old wood and burning hair. The pilot light below had grown into a full, ravenous furnace, its red reflection dancing on the brick walls of the corridor. He looked back. At the far end of the hall, the Vance thing was standing under the single flickering fluorescent light. But it wasn't alone anymore. Behind it, pouring out of the classrooms, came the others. They were silhouettes, thin and gray, their clothes rags that drifted in an invisible wind. Their faces were all identical, smooth, white surfaces with tight, black circles scribbled where their eyes should have been. They moved with a strange, syncopated rhythm, their limbs twitching like dead insects. "The work is not done, Marcus," they said in unison. The sound was deafening, a chorus of 500 children speaking with the weight of 50 years of summer heat. "You have to stay for the remediation." The Vance thing raised the marker. Marcus looked at the incinerator chute. It was 18 inches square, just large enough for a body to slide through if it went in shoulders first. It was a drop of 30 feet into a fire that would consume everything he was in less than 5 minutes. But below the fire, there was a grate. And below the grate was the ash pit, which opened into the exterior courtyard through a clean-out door that was only secured by a simple slide bolt on the outside. It was a chance. A fraction of a percent of a chance. If he stayed here, he would become a name on a mimeographed sheet. He would become a face with the eyes scribbled out, a shadow that lived in the ventilation shafts until the brick rotted into dust. The crowd of shadows accelerated. They didn't run, they simply blurred forward, the distance between them and Marcus having with every blink of his eyes. The smell of old paper and ozone was suffocating. He could feel their cold breath on his face. Marcus turned, gripped the edges of the iron chute, and shoved himself backward into the dark. The clean-up. The slide was vertical, smooth, and greasy with 50 years of soot. Marcus screamed, but the sound was torn from his throat by the upward rush of hot air. The metal lining tore at his clothes, ripping his jeans and scraping the skin from his elbows as he bounced off the joints of the pipe. The heat grew intense, a blinding, red wall that rose up from below to meet him. He hit the heavy iron baffle at the bottom of the secondary chute. It swung open under his weight with a sharp clack, dropping him through into the lower chamber. The primary burners were set into the side walls, creating an artificial vortex of fire that swirled 5 feet above the floor of the pit. Marcus landed hard on the iron collection grate below them, the wind knocked from his lungs in a violent oof. Above him, the fire roared like an engine. The heat was incredible, his hair was already curling, the skin of his face tightening and blistering under the radiation. Around him, the bags of rubbish he had thrown down earlier were already blackened husks, their contents turning to white ash that swirled in the draft. He scrambled on his hands and knees across the iron bars. His sneakers were melting, the rubber soles sticking to the hot metal with a sickening, sweet smell. The door, he gasped, his vision blurring with tears of heat and smoke. The clean-out door. He found it at the back of the pit, a small, rectangular iron hatch used by the maintenance crew to shovel out the ash after a burn. It was rusted, its hinges encrusted with gray scale. He threw his weight against it. It didn't move. Above the roar of the fire, he heard a sound from the chute. Thump. Something had entered the slide from the third floor. Something heavy. Something that didn't scream as it fell. Marcus looked up through the swirling smoke. Through the gap in the iron baffle, he saw two pale, elongated legs sliding down the pipe. The shoes were wingtips, their leather scorched and bubbling. The Vance thing was coming down. With a scream born of pure, primal terror, Marcus drew his leg back and kicked the clean-out door with everything he had left in his body. The heel of his melting sneaker struck the center of the iron hatch. The rusted latch on the outside gave way with a sharp snap. The door swung outward, and Marcus tumbled with it, falling into the cool, damp dirt of the school's rear courtyard. He didn't look back. He didn't look at the smoke pouring from the brick chimney, or the windows of the fourth floor, which were now dark and silent once more against the starlight. He crawled through the gravel, past the dumpsters, until he reached the chain-link fence at the edge of the property. He climbed it like an animal, tearing his fingers on the wire, and dropped into the high grass of the ravine beyond. Monday morning. On Monday morning, the sun rose over Oakhaven with a clear, blue indifference. The abatement crew arrived at 7 o'clock. There were 4 of them, men in white Tyvek suits with heavy respirators dangling from their necks, carrying air monitoring equipment and clipboards. The site supervisor, a man named Harris, walked up the front steps of the school. The double doors were unlocked. Inside, the building was cool and smelled faintly of floor wax. The walls were a clean, dry green and cream, the terrazzo tiles were smooth and uncracked, reflecting the morning light that streamed through the high windows. Harris walked up to the 3rd floor, his boots making a soft, normal sound on the stairs. He was looking for the vice principal to sign the safety logs before they began the internal demolition. He found Mr. Vance standing by the main office on the 1st floor. Vance looked tired. His tie was perfectly straight, though his face was somewhat pale, his eyes small and rimmed with a dull pinkish red. He was holding a heavy iron key ring in his left hand. "Mr. Harris?" Vance said. His voice was slightly flat, like an old recording played through a small speaker. "The building is ready for you." "Great," Harris said, flipping open his clipboard. "We checked the perimeter. Everything looks clear. Your student worker, the con kid, did a hell of a job. The halls are completely empty. Not a scrap of paper left." "Yes," Vance said. He smiled, though the corners of his mouth didn't quite seem to match the expression in his eyes. Marcus was very thorough. He completed his hours on Friday night. "Good kid," Harris said, signing his name at the bottom of the form. "Where is he anyway? I thought he was supposed to help us load the trucks this morning." Vance turned his head slightly. The motion was stiff, a little too slow, as if his neck were made of old wood that had swelled in the humidity. "Marcus won't be returning for the summer," Vance said softly. "His ledger is balanced. He's been retained." Harris frowned, looking up from his clipboard. "Retained? I thought he was a senior." But Vance didn't answer. He turned and walked down the long hall toward the stairwell, his heavy wingtips clacking against the tile with a dry, rhythmic regularity that sounded exactly like the turning of a page.